From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Well, thank you. So we're going to bring out our next cartoonist now. She designed the festival poster, so if you've seen her drawings big all around, you know it. She grew up in Brooklyn and ended up at the Rhode Island School of Design, and she landed at the New Yorker in the 70s when she said there weren't that many women cartoonists, and she enters this field, and now all this time later she has been described as the rock star of the New Yorker among the cartoonists. She, on top of all her other books, she came out several years ago with a memoir about elder care, a brilliant memoir. It's called, yes, it's called Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant? It won the Kirkus Prize at National Book Critics Award recognition, and it won the Heinz Award, which I think came with maybe $250,000 or something like that. So that'll sustain a cartoonist a little while longer. She also recently won the Reuben Award. We have with us in Roz and in Anne, two of the last 3 Reuben Award winners, so we're blessed with that from the National Cartoonist Society. And I think I have one of them here, if not. So I can't recommend more highly Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant if you haven't read it. And I just posted last week a piece that's on the Post site. It's a love letter about New York. It comes out in October. I can't recommend it highly enough. Another memoir, Going Into Town. Please welcome Roz Chast. Yeah, I want to step back and say I think it was in Small Press Expo some years back. You took me aside and you said, I have a story in me. My parents have died and I have something to say. I didn't know what to expect, and you come out with this book and it just blew me away. And we were talking about writing from reality, but what was it like for you to plumb into reality so deeply?
I think I felt that I really wanted to tell this story for a lot of different reasons. One was that my parents really were very unique, and I felt like my parents were born in 1912. They were a lot older than most of my friends' parents, and I felt like there were a lot of things about that whole generation that were just fading away. But also, as I said to my editor, you know, this really should be maybe shelved in the travel section, because I felt like this was a country that I was visiting that I didn't even know existed, and never mind never having been there. But, you know, as I said in the book, I thought, you know, from what I had read and all the books I've read and from movies I'd seen, that people got really old and then maybe like they were sick for like 3 weeks, they take to their bed. You know, that's what happens. They take to their bed. And then there's a death rattle. Yeah. And then they die, you know? And I didn't know that it could be that dying was this incredibly long, protracted, excuse me, I just got extremely distracted. Somebody is holding up a sign that says, say goodbye to Mike and Ann.
Yeah, she's reading it.
So, bye Mike and Ann.
No, they're up here not. Well, just
Can we leave?
Oh.
No, we're going to have, I have one more question.
I'm sorry.
You can leave.
I just, all right,
You're giving away all my stage tricks.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So you know where I'm going next. You know where I'm going. Yeah. Speaking of dying with a death rattle protracted here.
Yeah, sorry. It got so serious.
Got so serious.
Quickly,
getting the net. No, I did have one thing before we say goodbye to Mike and Ann. I did want to say one thing.
Yeah. What if we don't go?
You know,
I know. I miss them. I miss them already.
I know. I feel like they were just with us.
I know.
There are doors that are supposed to open. But,
I know.
No, what I did want to get to, you talked to me, we talked about in the 70s, you went to a New Yorker party, and it was men who were, they were, even your style, your style, they were, somehow that your style, and it was tied up with being female and all this, and they were, who is this young, you know, you were about 24, who's this young woman interloper? and I've talked with Anne about how there's still so few women political cartoonists out there, and so unfairly or not, you kind of have to be symbols for it, and for kind of standing up for women in your field. Has it gotten old yet? Do you feel empowered? Can you talk about that? Can you?
Well, I mean, I know that I don't want to speak for all my female editorial cartooning colleagues, but we think of ourselves as editorial cartoonists.
Yes.
I mean, sure, we do women's issues, and I think we bring, obviously, a very good, you know, perspective about it. But, you know, we're editorial cartoonists. That's what we do.
Yeah. And there's no, unlike what Roz was talking about in the 70s or 60s, sort of, you don't feel, male peers, you haven't run across male peers in your industry who have
Dismissed?
Dismissed.
Oh, sure. Are you kidding?
Oh.
Yeah, but you know, the more you're in it and the longer you're there, you get more respect, and you can, you know, slap them around a bit.
Yeah. There you go. Have you slapped around?
No, I just kind of like get a sad look on my face, and you know, prefer what my mother used to call the psychological. You know, give them the silent treatment.
Wow.
It's like,
okay.
no, I think that for me it was really mostly the older people. And, you know, when people have asked me about being a female cartoonist at the New Yorker, especially when I was younger, I always say that it's one of so many problems. Yeah. You know, it was being, I mean, I was 23 when I started. As being like 20 years younger than a lot of these, than the youngest of those people. Being female, my work looked totally different. It was a different sensibility. So it was just one star in the constellation of like, we don't like you.
Yeah.
You know, it was, so.
Well, now you're the rock star of that constellation. Yeah, it's true. Well, you may not notice, but it's time to say goodbye to Mike and Anne. Thank you guys so much.
Oh, these Mike and Anne. I thought maybe it was like somebody else in the audience. Or something. Bye.
Can I tell you one of my favorite cartoons? Can I just tell you one of my favorite cartoons that I've ever seen in my life was yours, and it was a woman reading a newspaper, and it was the obits, and it was a person's name, and then it says older than you, and then it said younger than you, about your age, a lot older than you. Yeah. Because I don't know about you, that's the way I read the obits.
Thanks. Nice to meet you. Bye.
Thank you, man. So I think the death rattle is going to come up a lot now. But I want to make sure to get to your images. But, you know, one thing that we talked about was, you know, you were growing up here, and it was Flatbush, right? The Flatbush part of Brooklyn. Yeah. We have represented. And so you're growing up with your parents, you have relatives around, you're in a tiny bedroom, and I think I asked you if you hated it, and hate was such a mild term for how you felt about growing up. Could you talk about that?
Well, doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that, that overhead light. Yeah. It was, you know, yeah, it was just a different era. Yeah. Yeah. You know, I guess. So, yeah. We're clearly going to switch topics here.
Okay. Well, let's start with. Can they get that one up?
I don't think it's up yet.
No, it's not on there. But, well, this is When Moms Dance. And,
yes.
So, there we go. So, how much like real life?
This cartoon was actually inspired by my daughter when she was around 16. And if you've ever been a teenager or had teenage children, you know that there's almost nothing more disgusting in the sight of a teenager's eyes than the adult human body, and which I don't totally disagree with, but if you really want to gild that lily, just do a little dance. And so my daughter was in the living room and she was doing her homework and she had some hip hop music on, and I just wanted to see if she was paying attention, so I did this little dance. Yeah. And she looked up and she said, "Mom, stop, you're hurting me. And I asked her if I could use it as a cartoon, and she said okay. So.
Did she ask for a cut?
No, she was very kind about it.
Okay. So, urban trail mix, you know,
yes.
the whole thing. And so you have talked about how many phobias you have and how much fear, entire book on A to Z on your phobias. Is it just a bottomless well of phobia material?
Yeah, a lot of things are just very troubling.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, Pigeon Little.
Pigeon Little.
You know.
This is...
I love that.
Oh,
so,
thanks.
you've talked about, you do a lot of interior cartoons, but when you go outside, something about Manhattan inspires you. Can you talk about that?
I really love Manhattan a lot. It's you know, which is why I wrote this book that's going to come out on October 4th called Going Into Town, which is what my parents used to call going into Manhattan from Brooklyn. You know, we would go into town. And of course, when I was a kid, we called it going into the city. Because Brooklyn wasn't really the city. Manhattan was what you meant, like when you said you were going into the city. Yeah. I don't know exactly why I loved it so much from the very beginning. I think I was just very distracted from my own, you know, interior, you know, troubles. I was trying to explain it to a friend, and sometimes even now when I get off, you know, I live outside of New York, an hour outside of New York, and when I get off the train and step into the street, I feel like just a little anonymous cell in a bloodstream, and the stream is moving, and I'm just kind of in this bloodstream, and I really like that feeling a lot.
Yeah.
And I've never, you know, fully analyzed why, you know, why it doesn't cause me more anxiety, why I find it sort of calming.
Yeah. So to analyze that, what we talked about, you said like you're an anxious person. You went to Connecticut, you went to the suburbs, and
that makes me anxious.
That makes you anxious.
Oh, God,
but you get into the thrum of Manhattan, and it allows you, it frees you.
Yes, but I think also because the things in Manhattan that are anxiety provoking are things that I know, whereas in Connecticut, well, there's things like suddenly you're in the house and you hear this weird sound and it's coming from the basement. Yeah. And when you're in an apartment, an apartment house, you don't have to think about what's in the basement. Yeah. You know, I know that there's a boiler down there, but I can like blank it out of my head. Yeah. But when I hear sounds coming from the basement, I always in a house, I think it's right under my feet. So like the house could sort of, you know, blow up. I don't know, just terrible smells. Yeah. A branch could fall on the house, break the roof. Yeah. You know, a car. Yeah. I mean, you're like, a house, there's almost no protection. Somebody could be driving down the street, lose control of the car. Yeah. You know? And bam, the car. You're like, you're in the living room. Wow. and I mean, it could really happen.
Wow. So how do you focus enough to do a cartoon when you're thinking about all the things that might befall you while you're doing the cartoon?
Well, there are medications for that. There's also caffeine. Yeah, it does help. And sometimes there are times when I've had a terrible fear, and then afterwards it seems really funny to me. Yeah. Like one time I was in the bathtub and I started thinking about the oldness of our house, and that the bathtub was on the second floor, and that water was really heavy. And I just started thinking, like, do bathtubs ever just kind of, you know, fall through the floor? Wow. And then later, it seemed kind of funny to me. Yeah, But
have you known anyone that has happened? No.
I don't know anyone that's happened to, but, you know, things happen. Somebody, actually, this was in Brooklyn, they were walking. This is so terrible. and a sinkhole opened up, like, just it was for one leg.
Wow.
Like one leg,
Yeah.
like fell into the sinkhole.
Oh
like
my
this,
gosh.
it just like kind of gave way.
Yeah, but nothing, no other legs. That was the only leg.
Of his like 6. No, I'm sorry. He had like two, this has been a long day.
Yeah.
He had two regular. He had 2 regular legs.
Yeah.
But one of them fell into the sinkhole. Oh dear.
We're never getting through this.
No,
one,
we're never.
So,
But yeah, I shouldn't be laughing.
No, that's I love it. I want to see it.
Yeah, you should Google it.
Yeah. So, so the last Thanksgiving. So again from reality.
Yeah. Yes.
Reality.
This is just when you cannot stand it anymore. You know, everybody was there. You know, their things and their needs and requirements and allergies and aversions, and they're on a cleanse, and you know they have their special needs. And everybody has a different one.
Yeah. Is every one of us neurotic basically on some level?
I think so.
Yeah, we are.
I think
all,
definitely.
Some of us own it, and some of us.
Yeah.
You know, around family and turkey and tryptophan, it can fully.
Oh yeah.
So the Holy Trinity. You do some of the best food humor around, just flat out.
Well, food is funny.
Food is
I mean, the
funny.
whole thing is kind of funny.
Yeah.
In a certain way.
From the sounds and names to how just we interact with it, what food means to us.
Absolutely. I mean, the whole thing is sort of hilarious.
Yeah. And similarly, in
and
the acquiring of
yeah. Yeah. Well, there's times when I'm in certain moods and I'm doing errands in where I live, and I realize that I'm not in the mode where I should be talking to other people.
Yeah.
And maybe I've been in my studio for like hours and hours and hours, and then if I don't go to one of these lines, some little bee in my bonnet will say like, Roz, talk to other people and, make conversation. And then suddenly, I'm saying something really awkward and it's just terrible.
Wow.
And,
Wow.
So, yeah.
When cartoonists talk, too.
Yeah,
sort of,
you're risking things.
So.
Oh, this cartoon came from, was inspired. This is the Gifts from the House of Low Goals.
Yeah.
And this was actually inspired by a real ad that I saw. I was on the train, the commuter train, and I saw this ad. It was for Carvel.
Yeah.
And it was, those funny little cakes. And there was a little girl. She was 7 years old with these cute little cat's eye glasses and like a party hat on. And she's surrounded by her family and her grandparents and friends. And on the cake is written, "Congratulations on your new glasses." And I thought, we've really, this bar is pretty low. So,
So the fountain of puberty.
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, there's a lot of fountain of youth gags. It's a genre in itself.
Yes.
But if you've ever sat outside of a middle school and watched kids come out,
Yeah.
There's
a lot there.
Yeah.
Okay. And you do. You do, again, your relationship humor is no one does it better, and it's I mean, and part of what I wanted to get to, you talk about you in going into town, you talk about your fascination with the visuals, the signage. Like signage to you is this deeply engaging hieroglyphics and genealogy and everything. Can you talk about signs media?
Well, I love in New York how, I say this in the book, the visual density of information everywhere you look. I mean, I suppose that if I knew the names of different trees, aside from like, I think this is a maple and this may be an elm, but I'm not sure, you know, then walking in nature might be very interesting to me. But when I'm in New York, I love, you know, the first level of stores, and then there's like a second level, and then there's the third, and you see, oh my God, juggling equipment, and it's still there, you know, like special, you know, weird underwear or something. I mean, there's just like millions. There's millions and millions and millions of stores. It's like that old SNL skit with the Scotch tape store. Except it's for real. There'll be like a store that's just like Scotch tape or ribbons or whatever. And I just love that.
Yeah.
And
do you put actual real signage ever that you've seen very specific into your cartoons? Or is it always with a twist? Or
it's you know, my version of it, I guess.
Yes. You're funny. So The End of Innocence?
This is an older cartoon, and it was actually inspired by life. And I remember I was in high school, and I really had a lot of problems with math, especially as it got more towards like the calculus end of it. And it was like they were talking a language I had no idea what they were talking about. And I was getting so wound up about it, and I remember I was taking this math test, and it was this really very clear moment where I thought, this doesn't matter. You know, it just doesn't matter if I pass this test or not. It wasn't like I was going to go to a special, it wasn't like I had any, you know, desire to go to MIT or something like that. I mean, it just didn't matter, and that had never occurred to me before, possibly because my parents were educators, and I was brought up that, you know, if you got below 90, there was something wrong. It was a cry for help, and you know, it was, you know, it had never occurred to me until that moment.
That it just didn't matter.
That it just didn't matter.
They can put up the next one.
Okay.
And while we're doing this. And while we're doing this, we'll have time in a minute for 2 questions if anyone wants to come to the microphone. But again, signage. I'm sorry, you're a genius at how signs work, how we interact with them.
Well, I think that's one thing about cartoons that. This cartoon I have a lot of fond memories of because it was a very early cartoon that I sold to the New Yorker. And the way it works at the New Yorker is that we all submit what we call the batch. And there's about 40 of us, you know, on staff, and we submit groups of cartoons. We don't just submit like one cartoon. We submit whatever, you know, 6, 10, 8 cartoons every week, sketches. And those are called roughs. And then if you sell one of the roughs, then you take it home and you do a finish, and you do the finished version. So this was Lee Lorenz, who was the cartoon editor at the time, art editor actually. He pulled out the sketch I had done of this cartoon, and he said, we're going to buy this one, but the little flag on the side of the mailbox, I had it sticking out like perpendicularly to the box, and attached to the door of the box. And he said, what is that? And I said, well, that's the handle. That's the handle when you open up the box. And he looked at me like I was nuts. And then I think he realized that I had never had one of those kind of mailboxes. And this was, of course, in the days before Google. So I just sort of made up what I thought it was, which was the handle with which you opened the door or whatever the mailbox to open it up.
You hadn't lived in the suburbs yet.
No, I had never lived in the suburbs. I always lived in an apartment house where there were, mailboxes, and you had your little key, and you did that.
Mailboxes and boilers and safe bathtubs.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, can we take a question right here?
Here we go. I'd just like maybe one comment and a question. I read the daily comics and the Sunday colored comics, and I must say the New Yorker has such which are funny sometimes and interesting and political comments, but the New Yorker seems to have so many weird creative ideas. I mean, you must work with a lot of interesting people. I'm not being weird, being bad, but you know, just more like out of somewhere. And secondly, what is the difference to you between a single impact comic and then the ones in the newspaper, you know, the newspaper comics where there's a sequential story as opposed to the single impact image?
So you're being asked to defend the entire eclectic system of the New Yorker humor. No, I'm teasing, but there is, you know, there is that range.
Yeah, I think it's a different sort of, well, it's most people I know at the New Yorker who are cartoonists, it's just very, you know, it's personal. It's like your style. And I think that's one thing that the New Yorker is sort of known for. And in fact, I don't think that most of the cartoons in the New Yorker are not terribly, like, when I think of those kind of cartoons, I think of them as kind of very cartoony with like googly eyes and like a big nose, and they kind of, to me, a lot of them look sort of similar. I'm probably really wrong about that. I'm going to get a lot of hate mail, but one other big difference is that with people who do the sequential thing, they have characters that repeat, you know, and I think that my cartoons have a sort of world that they come from, but it's not like, you know, the McGillicuddies or, you know, Ann and Mike, or, you know. I
knew they'd come back.
Yeah, they're always leaving. It's hilarious. Yeah.
Thank you. That's interesting.
Yeah. Thank you. And by the way, was this your first cover?
Yes.
Speaking of food,
that was the very first cover.
The history of ice cream, the family history of the roots of ice cream.
Yes, I'm so. It's an evolutionary chart of ice cream, but my father's interpretation of it was that it was a doctor telling you foods you shouldn't eat because they were bad for you.
Wow.
I know.
You don't try to explain to your parents.
No.
And you do crochet, right?
Well, it's actually embroidery.
I mean,
it's embroidery.
Yeah. So this was literally an embroidered cover.
Literally an embroidered cover.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this was very recent.
Yeah. It was for it was a tech issue and Mother's Day. And
what better way? Who else could have combined
those?
Yeah.
And it's a motherboard.
Yes. Is the
So yeah, it's embroidered. It was nuts. I got sort of obsessed, and a lot of fun.
Yeah.
For me.
And you make these brilliant eggs too.
Yeah, Pisanki eggs.
Yeah.
Pisanki
so
eggs,
you do a lot. And speaking of death rattles. So what we're gonna do quickly, I knew it would come back to death rattles in one way or the other.
Yeah, it always does.
It always does. So we'll take one quick question, and then we'll bring out our next cartoonist. So please.
Hi there. At the risk of being greedy, 2 quick questions. The first is if you could talk a little bit about process, if you work every day, if you take days off, how often, for how many hours you work. And number 2, what illustrators did you like as a kid specifically?
I work on the first question about schedule. The New Yorker is a weekly magazine, so I sort of work to deadline. And I always have other projects going on. So I don't make myself, like, say, and I'm going to work 6 hours every day or 8 hours. There are days that, you know, I mean, there's not so much division between when I'm working and when I'm not working, because I'm always writing down ideas. Studio time, you know, everything sort of counts. I mean, I'm sitting on, I'll be working for hours, like, you know, doing the embroidery thing or working on the Pisanki eggs or hooking a rug. So it's just, I feel like with the kind of stuff that I do, the work life and the not work life really flow into each other a lot. And the other question was, when I was a kid, I loved Charles Addams. And he was the first cartoonist that I fell big time in love with. And I also loved Mad Magazine, Don Martin. I just thought he was incredibly hilarious. And Sam Gross, and Gay and Wilson. I read, National Lampoon, all those people, Rick Geary. And of course the underground cartoonists, loved them too. I mean, I love the form. I just really love the form.
Yeah, well said, well said.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.